I retired at 63 and bought a small lake house on Georgian Bay so I could finally hear myself think. No deadlines, no conference calls, no neighbors close enough to borrow anything. Just the water, the loons, and 40 years of quiet I'd promised myself. Then my son-in-law called and told me his sister and her husband were moving in. Not asking. Telling. They need a place, Dad. You've got the space. This is what family does. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. But when they pulled up the driveway 3 weeks later, they found something waiting that changed everything. Before I go any further, I want to say something I wish someone had said to me before all of this started. If you've ever worked your whole life for one thing, one quiet, earned thing, and watched someone try to take it from you and call it love, this story is for you. Stay with me until the end. It matters. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I spent 41 years as a structural engineer with a firm based in Barrie, Ontario. I designed bridges, overpasses, the kind of infrastructure people drive across without thinking twice. I liked that anonymity. I liked building things that lasted longer than the people who built them. When my wife Margaret passed in 2019 pancreatic cancer, 7 weeks from diagnosis to funeral, I kept working for 2 more years because I didn't know what else to do with my hands or my evenings. When I finally retired, I had one plan. The Lakehouse. I'd found it the previous autumn on a listing site. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a dock that needed replacing, and 200 feet of Georgian Bay shoreline, about 40 minutes south of Parry Sound. The asking price was $620,000. I'd saved carefully over 4 decades, had my pension, and had sold our house in Barrie after Margaret died. I made an offer the day after I toured it. Possession date, April 15th. My daughter Claire called the evening I got the keys. She had her mother's voice, warm and immediate, the kind that made you feel like whatever you were doing was exactly right. Are you really there, Dad? Are you actually standing in it? I told her I was on the porch watching a merganser work its way along the shoreline. She laughed. You've been talking about this since I was 12. She wasn't wrong. How's Derek? I asked. A small pause. Busy. You know how he gets. I did know Derek Faulkner, my son-in-law, was the kind of man who was always managing something: deals, relationships, optics. He worked in sales for a software company and spoke about everything in terms of leverage. Claire was a physiotherapist with her own modest practice in Innisfil. She was steadier than him. She'd always been steadier than most people. We talked for another 15 minutes. When we hung up, I sat with the quiet for a long time. The bay was turning copper in the late light. A loon called somewhere past the point. I made a mental note that this was the sound I would fall asleep to and the sound I would wake up to, and that was enough. The call from Derek came 11 days later. I was sanding the dock boards when my phone rang. No greeting. Just, Gerald, Stephanie, and Rob need a place. Their lease fell through and they're between things. Your place has 2 spare rooms. They'd be there by the end of the month. I stopped sanding. Stephanie was Derek's younger sister. Rob was her husband of 4 years, a man I'd met twice at Christmas and once at a cousin's wedding. Neither occasion had left me with particular confidence in his decision-making. Derek, I said carefully, I just moved in. I'm not set up for, it's temporary. A few months. You've got the room, Gerald. This is family. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something colder. Recognition. I'd heard that phrase, this is family, used the way some people use a spare key, as permission they'd already given themselves. I'll think about it, I said. End of the month, he said, and ended the call. I set the phone down on the dock and looked at the water for a long time. Then I went inside, made tea I didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table with the notepad I kept for project planning. Old habit. I wrote the date at the top of the page. Then I wrote one question. What is actually happening here? I answered it in point form, the way I would approach any structural problem. Derek's sister needed housing. Derek had decided my property was the solution. He had not asked. He had informed. He had invoked family as justification. These were not the actions of someone who respected boundaries. These were the actions of someone who had already decided the outcome. I wrote a second question. What am I prepared to do about it? I slept on that question for 3 nights. On the 4th morning, I drove into Parry Sound. The first stop was the Ontario Provincial Police Detachment, not to file anything, just to ask a few questions. I spoke with a constable, named Morris, who had the patient manner of someone who'd answered the same questions many times. I asked about trespassing law in Ontario, about what rights a property owner had if uninvited guests refused to leave. He explained the process clearly. I took notes. I thanked him. My second stop was a hardware store on James Street, where I spent $480 on 2 wireless trail cameras with cellular connectivity, the kind used for monitoring wildlife. The clerk was helpful. I told him I'd had some trouble with bears near the property. He nodded and showed me how to adjust the motion sensitivity. I installed both cameras that afternoon. One covered the driveway from the tree line. One covered the front door and porch. I tested them from my phone. Clear footage, good range, timestamps automatic. My engineering instincts were satisfied. The third stop required more thought. I'd known a lawyer in Barrie named Sandra Okafor through a colleague. She'd handled Margaret's estate with quiet efficiency and had struck me as someone who thought carefully before speaking. I called her office the next morning and explained enough to get an appointment for the following Thursday. In the meantime, I called Claire. Your husband told me Stephanie and Rob are moving in with me. A beat of silence. Then, he mentioned he was going to talk to you about it. They're really struggling, Dad. The rental market in Innisfil is... Did he ask you before he called me? Another pause. Longer. He said you'd understand. Claire, I bought this property to live alone. This is my retirement. I spent 40 years building toward this. I know, Dad. I know. But they don't have anywhere. Where is Derek suggesting they go if I say no? She didn't answer that. When we hung up, I sat on the porch and watched a pair of loons dive and resurface further down the bay. They made it look effortless. I envied them. I'm going to tell you something now that I think is important to understand. The reason I didn't simply say no and hold the line wasn't weakness. Any person who has watched a family close ranks against one member knows that a bare refusal, without documentation, without preparation, becomes a version of events. And Derek, I was beginning to understand, was very good at versions of events. If I refused without preparation, the story would become, Gerald is difficult. Gerald has changed since Margaret died. Gerald is isolated up there and making poor decisions. I had seen that story start to be written already. I intended to be several chapters ahead before it reached anyone who mattered. Sandra Okafor's office in Barrie had the organized quiet of someone who billed by the hour and meant it. I arrived with a timeline I'd typed up, 4 pages, and a list of questions. She read through everything without interrupting. When she finished, she set the pages down and looked at me directly. You're right to be concerned, she said. Unwanted occupants in Ontario are governed under the Residential Tenancies Act. Once they establish residency, even informal residency, if Stephanie and Rob move in and you want them out, you may be looking at a formal eviction process that takes months. The fact that they're family makes it more complicated, not less. So if they arrive, and I can't stop them immediately, you document everything. Dates, communications, their presence on the property, your explicit statements that they do not have permission, and you talk to me before anything escalates. I asked about a will update. She nodded. We spoke for 90 minutes. Her retainer was $350 an hour. I wrote the check without hesitation. On the drive back to Georgian Bay, I stopped at a Canadian Tire and spent $190 on a proper deadbolt for the rear door and a latch-style lock for the boathouse. Not dramatic, just thorough. I want to pause here and tell you something that's been on my mind since I began thinking about how to tell this story. When Margaret was alive, I was never the one who managed conflict in our family. She was the one who knew when to speak and when to wait, when to offer and when to hold firm. After she died, I think people assumed I'd become easier to manage, more pliable, lonelier in ways that made me grateful for any attention, even the wrong kind. I think Derek assumed that. I think his mother, a woman named Brenda, who I'll get to shortly, assumed that as well. They were mistaken. Stephanie and Rob arrived on a Thursday, 4 days ahead of when Derek said they would. I was on the dock when I heard tires on the gravel. I watched my phone. The camera notification appeared within seconds. A silver pickup truck, 2 people getting out, stretching. A large dog, a husky, jumping from the back seat. I hadn't been informed about a dog. I walked up from the dock slowly. I was in no hurry. Rob spotted me first. He was broad-shouldered and amiable-looking, the kind of man who assumed warmth because he felt it himself. "Gerald, great to finally see the place. Derek said we'd find you out here. It's gorgeous." He extended his hand. I shook it. "Rob, Stephanie." She hugged me briefly. She smelled of cigarette smoke. I'd need to address that as well. "You're a few days early," I said. "Oh, Derek said you wouldn't mind. We were kind of anxious to get settled." She was already looking past me at the house, assessing. "I haven't agreed to this arrangement," I said, calmly, not hostile, factual. Rob laughed. "Derek said you were old-fashioned about things. Come on, Gerald. We're not strangers." "You're not strangers," I agreed. "But I own this property, and I haven't agreed to you staying here. I'd like you to wait here while I call Derek." I stepped to the side of the driveway and called Derek. He picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been waiting. "Gerald? They there already?" "Great. I knew you'd, I haven't agreed to this, Derek. I'm standing in my driveway telling them that. I want you to hear me say it clearly so there's no confusion later." A pause. Then the tone shifted. The easy sales voice dropped. "Gerald, they have nowhere to go. You're going to turn away family? What kind of person does that?" "The kind who owns the property in question. I'm going to give them the number of the Perry Soundbest Western and suggest they book a room while we sort this out properly." I could hear Derek recalibrating. "Fine. Stay on the line. I'm calling Mom." He didn't wait for my response. He put me on hold. I looked at Stephanie and Rob. They were exchanging a look. I recognized the look of people who had been told this would go smoothly and were now recalculating. The dog was sniffing along my garden border. Derek's mother, Brenda, came on the line 3 minutes later. She was a widow herself, early 70s, a woman who had raised her children with a fierce sense of clan loyalty that I had always found wearing. "Gerald." Her voice had the weight of someone who considered herself the family's moral authority. "I'm very disappointed. After everything Derek has done for Claire, Brenda," I said, "I haven't agreed to Stephanie and Rob living in my home. That's not a moral failing. That's a property boundary. Sandra Okafor's number is in my phone if anyone would like to discuss the legal specifics." Silence. "Then, you'll regret this, Gerald." "Perhaps," I said. "Have a good evening." I hung up. I gave Stephanie and Rob the name of the Best Western, wrote it on a piece of paper and handed it to Rob, and told them calmly that I was sorry for the inconvenience and that I hoped we could find a proper solution. They left. I went inside and wrote 4 pages of notes, including the exact time of arrival, exact words exchanged, and the content of both phone calls. Then I poured myself a small glass of Scotch Glenfarclas. Margaret used to buy it for birthdays and sat on the porch until the stars came out over the bay. I was not celebrated. I was tired. But I had not caved. That was something. What followed was 3 weeks of pressure that arrived from every direction. Derek called every 2 days. The calls were variations on 2 themes: guilt and implied threat. Guilt. "Don't you know how hard Stephanie has it?" Threat. "I hope you understand what this is doing to your relationship with Claire." Brenda sent a card, an actual written card, describing her disappointment in terms usually reserved for eulogies. 2 of Derek's cousins I'd met once at a wedding sent text messages. I was fairly certain Derek had drafted. The message was consistent. "Gerald is being unreasonable. Gerald has changed since Margaret. Gerald is alone up there and clearly not thinking clearly." I recognized the architecture of this campaign. It was the same strategy as the video gawk, but applied at a family level. Isolate the target. Control the narrative. Establish that the target is emotionally compromised so that their version of events carries less weight. I documented every contact. Dates, times, content, exact wording. I forwarded the most pointed messages to Sandra Okafor. She responded, "Keep going. They're building our case for us." Claire called on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks into the standoff. Her voice was different from the earlier calls, less coached, more genuinely distressed. "Dad, I don't know what to do. Derek is furious with me. He says I should be talking sense into you. His mother calls me every day. Dad, I'm exhausted." "I know, honey." I sat down on the porch steps. The bay was flat and silver in the evening light. "This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. Is it true you hired a lawyer?" "I'm getting legal advice about my property, yes. That's responsible. at my age. Derek says you're being paranoid, that you're treating the family like enemies. I chose my next words carefully. Claire, did Derek ask you before he told me Stephanie and Rob were moving in? A long pause. No. Did anyone ask me? She didn't answer. I love you, I said. That's not in question. But the question of who lives in my home is mine to answer. Full stop. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. A family of ducks worked along the shoreline, the mother moving in that deliberate way they have, the ducklings trailing behind in a loose cluster. I thought about Margaret. She would have had something useful to say. She always did. I thought I could almost hear it. Gerald, you're doing the right thing. Just don't lose your daughter in the process. I called Sandra the next morning. I want to make sure that whatever I do here protects Claire as well. Not just me. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Tell me everything you know about their financial situation. So I did. I told her about the lease that had supposedly fallen through. About Rob's business. He'd described it at Christmas as consulting. A word that, in my experience, covered a wide range of actual activities. Sandra asked me to find out what I could through legitimate channels. What I found through Ontario public records and a conversation with a former colleague whose son worked in property management was more than I expected. Rob had been a named party in a small claims court judgment 18 months earlier, a contractor dispute in Barrie. $14,000 awarded against him, still unpaid. Their last apartment lease had ended not because it fell through, but because of an N4 notice, a formal notice for non-payment of rent under Ontario's Residential Tenancies Act. They were 2 months behind when they left. I printed the records, added them to the folder I'd labeled simply documentation. Sandra's assessment, when I brought her everything. They were hoping to use your property as a soft landing while they sorted out debt they can't manage. Derek sold this to you as a family emergency. It's actually a financial problem they created and want you to absorb. And Claire? Does she know about the small claims judgment? I don't believe so. Then the question is the same one you asked me. When and how do you tell her? I asked Sandra about a formal property protection instrument. She walked me through the options available under Ontario law. I didn't need a full trust structure in the same way American law might require. My situation called for a registered declaration of ownership intent, updated beneficiary designations on my registered accounts through my financial institution, and a revised will with Claire as sole beneficiary conditional on specific terms Sandra drafted. The legal fees for the complete package came to $2,100. I paid it and considered it the best money I'd spent since the Lakehouse itself. The confrontation came on a Saturday in early July. I was replacing a rotted board on the dock, kneeling with a pry bar, when I heard Derek's car come up the driveway too fast, gravel scattering. He'd driven up from Innisfil alone. I set down the pry bar and picked up my phone. I pressed record before I stood up. He walked down to the dock, which meant he had to step onto my property to reach me, and he had to stand lower than the dock boards while I straightened up. Small details. I'd thought about them. I know you talked to a lawyer, he said. His voice was controlled, but his jaw was tight. I know you've been changing things. Your accounts. Your will. I've been doing responsible estate planning, yes. You're cutting Claire out. I'm ensuring Claire inherits clearly and cleanly, without any involvement from third parties. That's different. Third parties. He said it slowly, like he was deciding whether to be insulted. I'm her husband. You're her husband. You have no legal claim to my estate. The documents I've signed make that clarity explicit. You think I'm after your money, Gerald. That's what this is. I kept my voice level. I think you made a decision about my home without asking me. Pressured me through family channels when I didn't comply. And then initiated a campaign to suggest I'm mentally deteriorating because I hired a lawyer. I have all of it documented. He stared at me. For a moment his face was completely open. No sales warmth. No family man effect. Just calculation. You're making a mistake. I've made mistakes in 40 years of engineering, I said. Usually because someone didn't read the load specifications. I read mine. He left. I watched from the dock until his car disappeared around the bend in the driveway. Then I emailed the video to Sandra with the subject line. Derek Faulkner, Georgian Bay Property, Confrontation Record, July 5th. Her reply came within 40 minutes. Good. Let me know if he returns unannounced. That becomes trespassing. What I found 3 weeks later, almost by accident, changed the direction of everything. Sandra had requested a title search on my property as part of the documentation process standard. She said, just confirming nothing was attached to the deed I didn't know about. While her paralegal was doing that work, she also ran a routine search on Claire and Derek's property in Innisfil as a comparison point. What the search returned was not routine. Derek had taken out a home equity line of credit against their home 14 months ago. In Ontario, unlike some other provinces, both spouses must typically consent to and sign for a HELOC on a jointly owned property. The document Sandra obtained through registry records bore one signature, Derek's. The amount was $42,000. Sandra called me herself. Gerald, I want to be careful about what I say here. But if your daughter did not consent to and sign this agreement, which the registry suggests, she may not know this exists, and she has legal recourse. I sat at my kitchen table with the bay outside the window, flat and blue and indifferent. $42,000. The number sat in the air like something physical. How long would she have to address it? That's a conversation she needs to have with a lawyer of her own. But Gerald, she needs to know. That evening, I wrote out by hand everything I wanted to say to my daughter, and the order I wanted to say it. I rehearsed it on the porch until the words felt solid and the sequence felt fair. The next morning I texted her, I need you to come up this weekend. Just you. There's something important I need to show you, and it's better in person. She arrived Saturday at noon. She looked tired in the way people look when they've been managing stress they won't name. I met her at the car and hugged her. She was tense across the shoulders. We had lunch first. I'd made soup from scratch, her grandmother's recipe, another old habit, and let the conversation find its level before I brought out the folder. I set it between us on the kitchen table. Before I show you what's in here, I said, I want you to understand something. I am telling you this because I love you, and because you deserve to make informed decisions about your own life. Not because I'm angry, not to win an argument with Derek. Do you hear that? She looked at the folder. You're scaring me, Dad. Some of this will be hard to look at. I'm going to sit right here and let you look at it for as long as you need. I showed her the small claims judgment against Rob first. She hadn't known. She went quiet in the way that means processing, not yet fully feeling. Then the N4 notice from their last apartment. She knew about that one, she said, but Derek had told her it was the landlord's error. Then I slid the HELOC document across the table. I pointed to the signature line. Her name, unsigned. Derek's, signed and dated 14 months ago. She read it twice. When she looked up, her face had gone the color of someone who has just understood something they'd been half suspecting for a long time. He borrowed against our house. It appears so. $42,000, she said the number carefully. Dad, I never signed. I know. She stood up from the table and walked to the window. She stood there for a long time, looking at the bay. I let her be. When she turned around, she wasn't crying. She was something harder than crying. Is this why he wanted Stephanie and Rob at your place? To reduce his financial obligations by solving a family problem without spending anything, yes. That's my best reading of it. She sat back down. How long have you known? The HELOC, about 2 weeks. The rest, longer. I waited to tell you together, in order, because I needed you to see it as a sequence rather than as accusations. I'm angry at you, she said. I know, for not telling me sooner. I understand. We ate dinner on the porch. She didn't say much, but she stayed. After dark, when the loons were calling in the distance, she asked me what she should do. I told her I couldn't answer that. I told her she needed her own lawyer, someone with no connection to me or to Derek, and that she should speak to one before she spoke to Derek again. She nodded. She was her mother's daughter, in the end. She didn't need me to tell her what to do. She needed the information and the space to decide. She left Sunday afternoon with a copy of every document in the folder. Before she got in the car, she turned around. Did you know, when you were fighting Derek about the house, did you know then that this was about more than just the house? I suspected, I said. I didn't know. She nodded slowly. You protected yourself before you had proof. That was the right call. I protected us, I said. There's a difference. She drove away. I stood in the driveway until the sound of her car faded. wondering if I'd handled it well enough, knowing I'd handled it the only way I could. The legal process that followed took 4 months to fully resolve, and I will not burden you with every detail, because the heart of it is this. Claire retained a lawyer in Barrie, a woman named Patricia Simmons, who specialized in family property law. Sandra Okafor and Patricia Simmons spoke directly. The HELOC, Patricia determined, had been executed in a way that did not comply with Ontario's Family Law Act for jointly held marital property. Claire had grounds. Derek, when confronted by Patricia's formal letter, did what pressured people do. He minimized, then denied, then tried to negotiate. He told Claire it was for their future. He told her it was to help his parents, which was true in a way he hadn't intended to reveal. He told her it was complicated, and she wouldn't understand the financial side of it. Claire, by all accounts, listened to all of it, asked one question, "Did I sign that document?" and ended the conversation. She filed for separation in September. Ontario's separation process requires a 1-year period before divorce is finalized, which is not quick, but Claire said she found it clarifying. She knew what she was doing, and she was doing it at her own pace. Stephanie and Rob, in the meantime, found a rental in Orangeville. I don't know the details, and I didn't ask. Brenda sent me one final card. I read it, acknowledged what was true in it, and filed it. There was nothing left to answer. In October, I drove to Parry Sound to meet Sandra for the last scheduled appointment on the property matter. Everything was finalized, documented, and registered. My Lakehouse was as legally protected as a property in Ontario can be. My will was updated. My accounts were properly designated. I was, in her words, buttoned up. I asked if she thought I'd handled it well. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has worked in family law for 20 years. "You handled it like an engineer," she said. "You identified the load points, reinforced them before they failed, and kept the structure standing. Most people wait until something collapses." I thanked her and drove home. The following Sunday, Claire came for dinner. Her first visit since everything had settled enough to be called settled. She pulled up at 4 o'clock on a clear, cool October afternoon. The hardwoods along the driveway gone orange and red, the bay dark blue under a low sun. She stepped out of her car and stood for a moment just looking at the water. I met her on the porch. We stood there together for a while without saying much. An osprey worked the far shore, hovering, dropping, rising. The bay made the small sound it makes in October, a deeper sound than summer. "It's different up here in fall," she said. "Better," I said. "Quieter." We cooked together roasted chicken, root vegetables, simple things, and ate at the kitchen table with the window open to the evening air. She told me about her practice, a new patient, a complicated shoulder she was making progress with. I told her about the dockboards I'd replaced and the firewood I'd been splitting. Normal things, earned things. After dinner, we took our tea to the porch. The stars were coming out over the bay, the kind of clear October sky that Ontario does better than anywhere. "I'm sorry I got angry at you," she said, "for not telling me sooner. You had every right." "No, I mean," she paused. "You were protecting me in the way you knew how, and I made it harder than it needed to be. I'm sorry for that." "You were loyal to your marriage," I said. "That's not a character flaw. That's a virtue. He was the one who didn't deserve it." She was quiet for a moment. "Mom would have known from the beginning, wouldn't she? She would have spotted him." I smiled at that. "Your mother could read a room better than anyone I've ever known. I have her stubbornness, but not her instincts." "You have her instincts," I said. "You just had to find them." She looked out at the water. A loon called somewhere to the north, the long, wavering note that always sounds a little like a question. Claire laughed softly. "How many of those are out there?" "2 pairs on this stretch of bay, as far as I can tell. They're here until the freeze-up." "I want to learn their calls," she said. "I want to know which sound is which. Then you'll have to keep coming back." She smiled and turned to look at me. "I was thinking, if it's all right with you, I might look for something nearby. Not too close, but close enough." Something in my chest that had been held carefully in place for a very long time eased a little. "That's more than all right," I said. "That's what I'd hoped for." We sat there until the stars fully established themselves overhead, the loons calling back and forth across the bay, the porch boards creaking slightly in the October wind. I rocked slowly in my chair and let myself feel the weight of the year lifting, not disappearing, because some of it would never fully disappear, but lifting enough to breathe under. This was what I'd come here for, I thought. Not the solitude alone, but this a quiet evening, earned through years of work, and then defended through months of preparation. My daughter beside me, the bay going dark and still. I had not become someone harder or colder to survive the past year. I had become someone better prepared. And when she drove away that night, and I walked back to the porch to close up, I looked out at the water one more time, and I allowed myself the small, private satisfaction of a man who read the load specifications carefully, reinforced what mattered, and kept the structure standing. If this story meant something to you, please leave a comment below and tell me about it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to hear the next story, it's waiting for you on the left. Thank you for being here.